Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and this is your end of day market recap for Monday, the 12th. Geez, what a big day in terms of performance. Risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only, not giving any advice or recommendations. Please read that full risk disclaimer there. But I will talk about a couple groups today. I actually have a lot of charts to go over, which will be interesting. And I have, a really good semi setup that, even after a huge day today, I think that was really, for me, one of the big stories of the day was how well those semiconductors are outperforming right now. They turned in an up 3% day, but I think there's still opportunities there. So hang in there. I will go over a really, I think, compelling setup, bullish setup in one of the big semiconductor names. But it wasn't just the semiconductors, the software names again. So some of the usual suspects when we're seeing one of these risk-on days, which today certainly felt like today. The software group was up another 2.4%. Cyber names were up 2.2%. That's the CIBR ETF. Tech, again, same pace right there, up to 2.2%. And then you had clean energy names actually show up today. They were up 2.5% for the day. The small caps, they showed a little bit of cracks in the beginning of the day, but they hung in there, and they finished up about 0.5% for the day. And the micro caps actually held a bit of performance, or actually outperformed the small caps today, up about 0.75%. On the downside, we heard some comments from either some bank CEOs or some of the officers at banks, and every time one of those CEOs spoke for the smaller banks, it basically brought down the group a bit. So KRE was your underperformer, or one of the underperformers for the day, down close to 0.75%. So again, interesting because the financials are a big weighting in the small caps, so they really shook that off today, and the pot stocks were the worst performer. At this point, I could really take them off of this watch list, but it's still kind of interesting to see what they do. The VIX was actually up today, right? Why was the VIX up today with the market rallying like it did today? I'll let you think about that for a second. And so I'll let you think about that for a second. But interesting, this is not a group that I really look at every single day, just because it just really hasn't had a lot of momentum to it, and the trend hasn't been great. But this is what the clean energy ETF today did in terms of performers. Plug was up decently. We have seen call buying in that name. BE, another name that we've seen a little bit of call buying in. Interesting, a couple of the China EV makers, EPEV is in this ETF, and that was up 11%. So again, a lot of names in this ETF. We'll kind of start with this just to see if there's anything there. This is, again, the clean energy ETF. So this is what I'm referring to. Interesting. And of course, one day is not a trend. Would I be looking for opportunities here? I would want to see this group kind of look a little bit more healthy than this. For now, this looks like just a move up for now in a downtrend. So again, always good to kind of start with the ETF. We're going to do that in the semis in just a second. Here's what the S&P looks like in terms of the chart, which is, to me, just very interesting, again, considering that we've got a lot of events upcoming for this week. Here's what the 1 hour chart looks like. We did break through the highs, and we did so kind of in a meaningful way. The Qs too, start with the daily chart here for the Qs, but they managed to get over this consolidation that we saw last week. It looked like we stalled a couple times last week at the highs. And, this generally can happen here. Let's just make sure my screen, bring this down here a little bit. There we go. This can happen a few times where you get to an area and you stall out. And then when you do break it, it can be quite interesting when it does get broken like that. So, that's the breaking of the resistance, or that's the breaking of the top of the range, and doing it very impressively. All right. So I'm going to come back to this question that I posed just a second ago about the VIX. Right. So why did the VIX go up today with the market going up? Well, it's not frequent that it does that, but it can do that. It can do that when the market really starts to move aggressively to the upside. Remember, think about volatility. Usually volatility is moving faster to the downside, right? When equity prices are moving down, right? It's the old it's the old expression that you hear a lot of times on Wall Street: stairs up an escalator down, or stairs up an elevator down. Usually volatility will rise when the market's moving down, because generally it will move to the downside faster. It will also, the VIX will also move up sometimes in anticipation of events. So I mentioned we have a very event-driven week. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I want to get to more of the charts, but I think that, you know, if you've been paying attention a little bit, you know, and listening either to my videos or listening to some other broadcast, you know that we've got that this is a very big event-driven week. For example, we have the CPI report tomorrow. They're looking for only 0.1. I think they actually changed this. I thought that, when I looked at this last week, it said 0.2, but it looks like it's 0.1. Ex-food and energy, they're looking for 0.4. And here's the year-over-year number. I'm not going to explain this. You could go to my video on Thursday and you could talk about, you could listen to what I was referring to about the CPI coming down, because we're going to be rolling off some of those high months of last year. So automatically it will come down, because you've had a couple months in there that were like plus 1% for the month. So this number should be coming down, and it will the next couple months. But interesting that the number is 0.1. So this is going to have to come out somewhat in line with this. If it shoots up 0.4, 0.5, I would expect some of that volatility to not just be in the VIX, but to be in equities, right? You might see a hiccup, all right? And then, of course, like, that's just the first event for the week. We also have the PPI report, and then we have the Fed, you know, and here's what the Fed is implying, right, which is subject to change. I put this out on Twitter, and a couple people didn't seem to like this. They're like, well, you know, that's what some people think. It's, you know, it's not what people think. It's what the market is telling you, right? So nobody's like, you know, putting up on a chalkboard like, oh, now it's 25%, you know, that people are implying for an interest rate hike for June. It's what Fed fund futures. So there's a market for this, right? It's called what Fed fund futures are implying, right? And people do trade that, you know, what the expectations are for an interest rate hike. Again, so it's not people sitting in a room coming up with that, you know, that this is what they think is going to happen, or taking what brokers think. It's what the market is telling you. Now, the market will change based on new information. So for example, if that CPI report shoots up, but, you know, way over expectations, then this number is going to go up too. So it's not necessarily, you know, again, I think people are putting the fact that they think it's, you know, perhaps, you know, what the future is telling them. It's not. It's what the market is telling you right now, and what the market expectations are. That's the important thing. The expectations are that there is not a big chance that they're going to raise interest rates. There still is a chance come Wednesday. It's 25%, so that's something. But that's what we have, and it does appear that there's more of a weight on what the July meeting, which is 86%. But again, all of this is subject to change. Something comes out, you know, Powell could change this too, right? So for example, like, you know, we're not going to hear from the Fed until Wednesday, but let's say Powell was speaking tomorrow. If he were to come out and say something, he could move this market, right? So again, it's just telling you what the market is currently pricing in. You could disagree, just like with the S&P price, right? Here's what the S&P is doing. There's a lot of people who disagree with what it's doing, but it is what it is. This is the price of the S&P, right? There's no doubt about that. And it's the same thing with the Fed fund futures. There's no doubt about what it's telling you currently. And again, it may adjust, just like the S&P will adjust to new information. All right. So that's I think important, right, to stress that we've got that, and we also have quadruple witching. So we don't know how this week is going to shake up, but I would say that, you know, it's been very impressive to see this price action. And this is a very good example. This is Oracle today, right? Oracle just reported after hours, but look at the move this stock has been making. Normally, when you see something like this is kind of a little bit dangerous. A big gap up, it kind of looks like a possible exhaustion gap. But I think right now the stock is trading even higher. It's trading 120. Again, always remember, some people look at the earnings numbers, and then they look at what the price is doing after hours. You have to have a little bit more of a feel for that, right? The stock isn't just going to go up on those numbers, right? It ran into the report pretty significantly. So yes, they had a very good quarter, but you also have to look at the stock was already up 6% today, right? And because if you're thinking that the stock is just going to, the results are in a vacuum as if nothing else is going on, that's really not how it works, right? And I hope that if you're a viewer watching this video, you know that, right? You know that the stock, if the stock rallies heavily into the report, it's going to make the stock harder for it to go up, even if they have an excellent quarter. So let me get to I think one of the most important things that today, or one of the most interesting things, were what the semis did today. And even before we look at the price alone of what the semis are doing, I think this chart also makes sense to look at too. This is SMH versus Qs. So this is a ratio chart. You put the SMH in the numerator, you put the Qs in the denominator, and you can kind of see how the relationship is. Now you have to be careful with these ratio charts. There's a lot of people who use them who I don't think fully grasp them, because many of them are not traders. But these two things can go up, so if the semis go up as much as the Qs, right, this ratio doesn't really change too much, and vice versa. If they're both falling the same, right, the chart will look the same. So it's very misleading, right? All this is telling you is if one is outperforming versus the other. It doesn't tell you if both are going up or both are going down. It just tells you what one is doing the other. And semis had this big outperformance, and then they kind of scaled back a little bit. They rested for a couple of weeks, and the rest of the Qs kind of outperformed. But now you see this kind of coming back some. So I think that this is kind of an interesting note, because we're comparing two things that are really strong. The Qs have been really strong all year long, and now the semis are have been outperforming. So here's what the SMH looks like on the daily chart. I thought this was really good. Towards the end of last week. We also saw some option flow. Here was the option flow, which I brought up for you. I don't know if I went over this in Friday's video, but it caused me to kind of, I was already looking for long setups on Friday in the semis, but I went long SOXL based on this order, which was 430,000. Notice a couple things with this order that this was on Friday, right? But this got me long the semis leveraged. This is a 3 times leveraged ETF, so you have to be careful of that. But this was an opening trade, number one, a sizable trade, 430,000, and also a short-term bet. Right, they're just going to this Friday's expiration. So this was really interesting, and it paid off. You had to have a little bit of patience because when this hit the tape, it was very close to. If we go to the time that this hit, right, the time was 9:39. So right in here, right when we took out that version point of control. So you have to be careful sometimes with the option flow. Sometimes it marks the top for the day, right? No one will tell you that on Twitter, right? Because I don't know, there's a lot of people that are very fascinated with option flow, but I've been doing this a long time, and I know that sometimes the option activity works, sometimes it doesn't. So if you bought when you saw that order hit the tape, that marked basically the high of the day, and the rest of the day was tough, right? I mean, I actually, how I traded this was I added a little bit into this, and then I took the ad off at the end of the day because I didn't want that kind of exposure, but I kept my original trade on, and it worked out quite nicely today to see this rally. So what's particularly interesting, whenever you look at an ETF, particularly a sector ETF, is to look at what's going on inside the ETF. So I thought names, one of the names that we caught in the pre-market session that looked like it was setting up was Broadcom. Broadcom was up 6.3% today. And whenever I look at Broadcom, I look at Lam Research. This was on our watch list last week, and it just kind of took its time doing that. AMD, which has this event tomorrow, I actually took my position off. I understand it may rally into the event again tomorrow. I don't know what they're announcing, but they're supposed to announce a new AI chip. So this was a really nice signal that happened towards the end of last week. We saw both call buying and put selling, and that name worked out real well. ACLS is another smaller cap name that's looking pretty well. Synopsys, right, is another name too that may just be getting going, right? And what else do I have written down on my list? MRVL is another name that had good earnings, right? This name looks like it's turning too. So again, you see this pattern over and over where, you know, a lot of these names, they broke out and then they're kind of resting a little bit. So what's the one name that I left out? And I said in the beginning of the video that I was looking at, yep, it's NVIDIA. So what do I like about this? So I was long in here. I actually bought some after earnings and traded some and I've been out of it. So I got back into this name today. So why did I do that? Well, let's examine the 1 hour chart. What I think is particularly interesting here is notice that, you know, this is when I bought it after earnings and I took profits into here, and I really haven't been messing around with it. I tried it once last week. It didn't work and I got out of it, right? Sometimes if you're going to do that in trades, right, you're going to sometimes try trades, then they don't work and you take them off and you wait for a better setup. So it's just getting over last week's, or it's trying to get over last week's high. Another thing to note here is the narrowness of the value area. When you have a value area that is that narrow, and again, you kind of have to look back because there's been some other narrow value areas in here too, but in relation to the last couple of weeks, the value area is pretty tight. Right, and that means that the price action is the same thing. It's tight and it can really you know, move. So this was worthy of me starting a trade today at the end of the day, you know, even though I don't really want to do that with all the events this week, but we did talk about a hedge that you could put on too, to kind of hedge yourself with an option trade through some of the week's events. I'm not going to go over that because that's for TTG members, but you know, you've got levels. So whenever I get involved in a trade, it's never, oh, you know, I am excited about this setup. It's a good setup, but I know where it's not going to work. For example, if it breaks back inside value, which is just a couple bucks below 392, then it's time to be patient again. And I will probably just leave the starter position on and not do anything. Where would my stop price be? Well, it's very simple. That would be below the value area, right? So just like last week, I tried to trade in here and it reversed the next hour and I was out of it the next hour. There's no messing around. So again, really separating what I try to do in my trading and what I try to teach traders to do is separate what your gut instinct, you know, you can have gut instincts to make you look at trades and so forth, but you have to let the prices dictate whether or not you're going to stay in a trade or not, right? Stubbornness and all of that stuff. Right? If you're, you know, if you're a trader, you want to get rid of stubbornness and all of that as soon as possible, right? And realize this may be a good setup, but there may be some unforeseen event that makes it not work. What if AMD comes out with a chip that's better than NVIDIA's tomorrow? Now, I don't think that that's going to happen, but you don't know. And this could actually start to reverse and go to the downside. So that's important to watch, right? Also, what if the chip that AMD comes out with is underwhelming, right? Is not, the critics come out and they say it's not as good as NVIDIA. Well, that could make that the price go up in NVIDIA. So there's a lot of things in play for tomorrow. And that's why we go back to watching what our levels tell us. So, you know, above 383, I want to be long. Below, 393 is where I want to be long, and below 383 is where I don't want to have a long position. While if it continues to go sideways, then I want to be on watch. And in my opinion, it's okay to have a starter position to you know, get you into the position first. And then, of course, if it does start to break higher, then I want to add to that starter position. All right, so that's the setup. And I think it's, you know, I think it's compelling here, considering that this name has been going sideways now for 1, 2, maybe 2.5 weeks at this point. All right, what happened outside of this group? Tesla, you know, I got rid of my trade on Friday for profits. That worked really well. I'm hoping that this consolidates, but it may not. We're starting to see, I thought the option flow was really interesting, what we saw today. We saw some positioning out, going out a couple months, very bullish. But short term, there was a little bit of put buying. Maybe they'll both be right. Maybe it can come in a little bit and then it will resume going higher. At this point, I think it's extended. Again, it doesn't mean it can't continue to go higher, and I'm bullish long term, right? I put this chart out, and again, as soon as you put out, I wasn't trying to put out a prediction, I'm just telling you what it is. It's the 80% rule has triggered once it got above 205 and into the value area, and ultimately the 80% rule will be fulfilled at 320. Now, it's not a 100% rule. It's not guaranteed to happen, but these are the laws of the universe using value areas, right? Volume at price, right? So again, doesn't have to get there in a straight line, could come all the way back in and check. But for now, the 80% rule is active. So that's a good one to cover. I had up here, I brought the screen up just very briefly. Interesting, when you look at the 52-week high list, what do you notice in here? Is it just one sector? And this is just S&P, by the way. This is not NASDAQ or the Qs, but this is just S&P. What do you notice in here, right? Is it all tech, for example, right? Well, there are some tech names in here, right? There's Applied Materials in here, Adobe's in here. You could probably, or Oracle, which we just covered, is in here. But is it all tech? No, you have actually some home builders in here. You've got a DHI, you've got Pulte, which I saw in here someplace too, and then you've got a decent amount of industrials in here. You've got Ingersoll Rand, which is IR. You've got ETN, Boeing, which I want to cover that chart in just a second. FLT is in there. Biogen. So you've got various different sectors in here. You've got a couple healthcare names in here too. You got ABC in here too, and I think Cardinal Health I saw somewhere in here too, right? So some cheapy names in there in the healthcare space. So all in all, that's pretty good representation. Now, you don't have every sector in there. I don't think there's a financial in there, but maybe FICO, I guess. But overall, I think that's pretty good. So here's what Boeing looks like. This is one of my favorite charts. When you look at the weekly chart, right? It is, remember I traded this back in here, took it off at this VPOC, and that kind of was the high of the year so far. But we're returning to that, until recently. Remember, that's why we pay attention to Virgin point of controls. It becomes a battle of sellers and new buyers. Here, the sellers won out, the overhead supply won out, but it looks like it's starting to kind of warm up to the possibility of breaking out. Now, there's going to be this air show that's coming up where usually they announce new orders. So it'll be interesting to hear if Boeing is really grabbing some market share from Airbus. And that's something to watch in the next couple of weeks. But I have to say, price action coming out of this, 6-month sideways price action is very interesting in here. Amazon is another name that saw calls today. I think this chart looks pretty good, right? Since this VPOC was taken out, right? The sellers won here in the short term. But if buyers can kind of push it back above this 127 level, I think interesting. We saw a lot of 140 strike calls go up in October today, right? And then a couple other, smaller growth names. Celsius acted very well today. A name that I'm watching, a couple setups that I'm going to be watching over the next couple days is Datadog, right? Has spent some time consolidating, really had an ugly red candle in here, but buyers seem to be coming back in. The level to watch there is 97.34. If you're bullish, Datadog, you want to see it stay above that level. Smaller cap name, NNOX, want to see that get and stay above 1917. It just barely closed there. BLDR is another name that I really like here, which has been strong all year long. TGLS also managed to get into the value area and above the 50-day moving average. I didn't get a chance to throw that name back on because I just don't want to own every name right now with all the events for this week. So I think that's good enough for the week. Every once in a while, I show what our watch list is doing at Tribeca Trade Group, but just to give you a glimpse of what you get when you're a TTG member, right? There's kind of the watch list where we start the week, and you could see I begin to kind of add names, right? And all this is, it's not for bragging rights or anything like that. It's to help provide setups and to help provide a game plan as you get into the week, and names that, you know, again, this is off to a really like hot start for the week. Well, you know, these names may pull back given some of the events that we have, and it becomes, you know, names that I want to keep tabs on. All right. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.